I'm David Carter, and this morning my wife walked into the Manhattan courthouse on the arm of her boyfriend, laughing like she'd already spent half my life's work. She leaned in and whispered, "I'm going to take everything." I didn't argue. I buttoned my navy blazer and watched her heel-click victory march echo off the marble. What she didn't know, 7 years ago, sleeping in my pickup after getting burned once, I started building a fortress out of paper, trusts, LLCs, timestamps, signatures. Not to cheat her, to protect me. Tyler thinks he hit the jackpot. Amanda thinks community property is a crowbar. Their attorney thinks noise beats evidence. Judge Catherine Doyle doesn't think. She reads. Men, if someone you love plotted to strip you clean, what would you do? Yell, beg, or prepare? In the next minute, I'll show you how a smile died, a plan collapsed, and why sometimes justice isn't thunder, it's math. Stay with me. You'll want every receipt today. Everyone thought Amanda and I had the dream marriage. On Instagram, it looked bulletproof. Summer photos in the Hamptons, champagne toasts at the plaza, our kids smiling in matching outfits. Friends called us the power couple. I wore the hard hat by day, running Carter Construction, and the tailored suit by night at charity galas. She was radiant, flawless, the woman who could walk into any room and own it. From the outside, we were untouchable. But here's the truth no one saw. Beneath that polished veneer, cracks were spreading. Her smile lingered for the cameras, not for me. Dinner conversations turned into silences. The bed grew colder long before the betrayal. Looking back, the warning signs weren't whispers. They were sirens I chose to ignore. Why? Because admitting the truth would have meant admitting my marriage was already slipping away. And the night I realized it was more than silence was the night everything started unraveling. At first, it was little things. Amanda used to greet me at the door with a kiss, her perfume still clinging from the office. Then one night, she barely looked up from her phone. "Long day," she muttered, scrolling, eyes glassy from a world I wasn't part of. Dinners turned into leftovers eaten alone. Her laughter, the sound that once filled our kitchen, shifted to muffled conversations behind closed doors. She claimed late-night yoga classes, networking events, just wine with the girls. But the glow in her eyes wasn't from yoga. On weekends, she'd wander Fifth Avenue for hours, coming home with bags I'd never seen her buy before. Gifts, but not for me. Even her touch changed. Cold, mechanical, like her body was present, but her mind had already moved on. And men, if you've ever felt your wife's warmth vanish overnight, you know the gut punch. I should have confronted her then. Instead, I asked myself one haunting question. Who was she laughing with when she wasn't laughing with me? That's when I first heard his name, Tyler Brooks. On paper, he was charming, ambitious, self-made. In reality, he was a parasite, a man who drifted from woman to woman, living off their credit cards and their need for excitement. Tyler dressed the part, tailored jackets he didn't buy, a Rolex borrowed from his last conquest, the kind of grin that hides bankruptcy papers. Men like him know how to lean in close, pour another glass of wine, and whisper exactly what a restless wife wants to hear. Amanda called him a business consultant, but the only business he was in was siphoning money from women who should have known better. The first time I saw him, he shook my hand like he already owned half of me. His cologne was loud, his smile louder. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a fling. Tyler wasn't after Amanda's heart. He was after my fortune. And Amanda was already letting him in. I pieced it together slowly, receipts in her purse, charges on the Amex that didn't match her story, the Plaza Hotel, twice a week, a suite that cost more in one night than most men make in a month. I imagined them there, champagne chilling in silver buckets, her heels kicked off on marble floors, Tyler's smirk growing wider with every dollar she spent. She thought she was being discreet, but betrayal has a smell. It seeps into the walls of your home. She laughed louder with him than she ever had with me. And the worst part? I let it slide at first. I told myself, maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe she just needs space. But deep down, I knew. Amanda wasn't sneaking around to find herself. She was sneaking around to replace me. And the night I finally saw the proof with my own eyes was the night every illusion shattered. The plaza became their temple. Every Wednesday and Saturday, Amanda vanished under the excuse of client dinners. In truth, she was slipping into a corner suite overlooking Central Park, paid for with my money. I can still picture it. Crystal chandeliers throwing gold light across champagne glasses, room service carts stacked with oysters and caviar, Tyler lounging in a silk robe that wasn't his, toasting to a fortune he hadn't earned. Amanda, draped in designer dresses, laughing like she'd rediscovered youth. Concierge staff knew them by name. Valets parked her Mercedes as if it were Tyler's. To outsiders, they looked like a power couple. To me, they looked like termites eating through the beams of my life. Every receipt, every charge, was a reminder. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, calculated, deliberate. And while they thought they were building their future in luxury, what they didn't realize was that every toast at the plaza brought them one step closer to their downfall. Word travels fast in New York, faster when a man like Tyler can't keep his mouth shut. I later learned he bragged about Amanda at a bar downtown, glass of bourbon in hand, voice loud enough for half the room to hear. "Boys," he said, slapping the counter, "I've hit the jackpot. Amanda Carter, loaded husband, no prenup, community property state. Half of his empire will be hers, which means ours." His friends laughed nervously, but Tyler leaned back, smug. He showed off the Rolex she'd bought him, the BMW parked in her name. Miami penthouse, ocean view, already picked it out. In 6 weeks, I'll be drinking mojitos on the balcony while her husband cries into his tax returns. That was Tyler, a man who thought charm was strategy and greed was intelligence. But what he didn't know, what Amanda didn't know, was that my empire wasn't built on sand, and the day they tried to cash in their jackpot was the day the house always wins. Amanda thought she had it all figured out. Over wine at the plaza, she whispered to Tyler, "David's worth at least $8 million. 5 years of marriage means half of it is mine." She said it like it was already printed on a check. She dreamed out loud. Miami penthouses, designer closets bigger than our entire bedroom, vacations where the champagne never ran dry. Tyler nodded, pretending it was their future, when really he was picturing how fast he could burn through it. What Amanda never stopped to consider was how wealth like mine survives betrayal. She thought money sat in joint accounts, waiting to be sliced in half by a judge. She didn't know about trusts, LLCs, corporate shields, structures built brick by brick long before she ever showed up. She believed she was walking toward freedom. In reality, she was walking into a cage she'd built with her own greed. And I was waiting for the door to slam shut. It started with silence, the kind that hums louder than words. Amanda's phone, once left face up on the counter, was now glued to her hand, screen flipped over whenever I walked into the room. She claimed late-night strategy calls, but I could hear the muffled laughter, the softer tone of voice she never used with me. Her perfume lingered on nights she didn't kiss me goodbye. The sheets smelled faintly of cologne I didn't own. She stopped asking about my projects, stopped caring about the long hours I worked. At dinners, she scrolled through her phone while I ate alone across the table. The final straw? A charge on our Amex, $12,200 at the plaza, on a night she told me she was visiting her sister in Queens. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I felt a cold certainty settle into my bones. Because once you notice betrayal, you can't unsee it. And the truth always comes knocking. It was past 11 when the front door slammed. Amanda walked in, heels clicking like gunshots against the hardwood. She didn't bother with excuses this time. She stood in the doorway of my office, arms crossed, a smirk carved across her face. "I filed the papers, David," she said flatly. "Half of everything you've built will be mine." She delivered it like a victory speech, her diamond earrings catching the lamplight, her confidence dripping like poison. Tyler's cologne still clung to her dress. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just leaned back in my chair, hands folded, watching the performance. Inside, my pulse was steady, almost calm, because I knew what she didn't. She thought this was the beginning of my end, but it was the beginning of hers. And as she stormed upstairs, certain she had already won, I whispered to myself the truth I had prepared for 7 long years. The fortress will hold. Long before Amanda, there was Kendra. I was 31, broke, and blind in love. She smiled while draining every account we had. Credit cards maxed, savings gone, debts stacked so high I could barely breathe. The day she left, I came home to an empty apartment and a single note. "You'll recover. I already have." I didn't recover. Not right away. I spent 6 months sleeping in my pickup truck, showering at a 24-hour gym, taking construction shifts just to cover gas. Every night, staring at the ceiling of that cab, I swore one thing: never again. If love was a gamble, I'd play with the house rigged in my favor. That promise wasn't romantic. It was survival. So when Amanda whispered her threat years later, she wasn't facing a helpless husband. She was facing a man who had already lost everything once. And the man who's been broken before is the one you should never underestimate. Sleeping in that truck taught me a brutal lesson. Love can blind you, but paperwork never lies. Every dollar I earned after Kendra was sacred, and I treated it like bricks in a wall I was determined to build. I didn't just want to rebuild my wealth, I wanted to armor it. So I studied late at night, devouring books on asset protection, trust law, corporate structures. I met with attorneys, accountants, men who spoke in contracts instead of promises. Piece by piece, we constructed something stronger than emotions: an estate plan, LLCs, irrevocable trusts, family partnerships. Every document was a lock, every signature another layer of steel. Friends called it paranoia. I called it insurance, because I knew the world doesn't reward innocence, it rewards preparation. So when Amanda walked in years later thinking she'd found a jackpot, she had no idea she was staring at a vault with doors welded shut. And the woman holding the blueprints was waiting for her call. I still remember the first time I sat across from Rebecca Hayes. Her office didn't look like a lawyer's den. It looked like a command center. Floor-to-ceiling monitors glowed with flowcharts of corporate structures, trust diagrams, arrows connecting names I didn't yet understand. She shook my hand firmly, eyes sharp, no wasted words. "You've been burned once," she said, flipping open a thick binder. "If you don't want it to happen again, we build now. Not later, not when you're in love. Now." Rebecca wasn't just an attorney, she was a strategist. She spoke about LLCs like chess pieces, trusts like fortresses, contracts like shields. Every sentence carried certainty, as if she'd already seen the war and knew how it ended. I left that first meeting with more than legal advice. I left with a general who would help me wage a quiet war against the future. And years later, when Amanda filed for divorce, Rebecca was already 3 moves ahead. Rebecca started with the Carter Family Trust. "Think of this as your castle walls," she told me, sliding a notarized document across her desk. Every property, every long-term investment I acquired would flow into that trust, untouchable, immovable, shielded from whatever storms came later. The trust wasn't a loophole. It was a structure, legal and airtight, signed and stamped years before Amanda ever entered my life. Next came Carter Brothers LLC. My brother Samuel and I split it, 51% in his name, 49% in mine. Every truck, every piece of equipment, every contract for the construction business flowed through that entity. On paper, I wasn't a lone owner anymore. I was part of a corporate body, and no divorce lawyer could rip that apart. Rebecca smiled as she closed the folder. "You've just built yourself a fortress, David." And the irony? Amanda spent 5 years inside that fortress, without realizing every door she thought was open was already locked. Rebecca didn't just stop with the trust and the LLC. She mapped out my life like a battlefield. "Your home," she said, tapping the deed, "goes into the family trust. That way, if anyone tries to claim it, they'll find themselves suing a vault, not you." The cars? Registered under the Carter Brothers Fleet Program. 10 vehicles, all technically company property, maintained on business accounts. Amanda could drive them, polish them, pose for photos, but legally, they were never ours to split. The investment portfolios were tucked away inside irrevocable trusts. I only drew a monthly allowance, just enough to live comfortably, but never enough to expose the principal. Even the checking account was carefully managed, joint on the surface, but never holding more than what I was willing to risk. Amanda thought she was married to a man. She didn't realize she was married to a structure. And one day, she'd learn the difference, in the harshest way possible. When Amanda's lawyer, Martin Klein, filed the divorce petition, it landed on Rebecca's desk like a predictable playbook. She barely glanced at the bold claims before smirking. "Standard community property argument," she said, red pen circling lines like a general marking weak points on a map. "House, trust-owned, business, LLC, vehicles, corporate fleet, investments, irrevocable. This isn't a lawsuit, David. It's wishful thinking." She flipped pages with surgical precision, noting every assumption Klein had made, that everything was in joint names, that I was careless, that success meant vulnerability. "He's arrogant," Rebecca said. "He's betting on intimidation. Men like him talk louder when their case is thin." I sat across from her, calm as ever, watching her dismantle the very document Amanda believed would make her a millionaire. Rebecca looked up. "They've already lost, David. They just don't know it yet." And I realized Amanda wasn't walking into court with a weapon. She was walking in with a water pistol. The hardest part wasn't building the fortress, it was pretending it didn't exist. When Amanda waved her threats in my face, I didn't argue. When she bragged about her slam-dunk case, I only nodded, silent. To her, my quiet looked like defeat. She mistook my calm for surrender. Every smirk, every sarcastic remark, every dinner where she flaunted her late-night business meetings, I let it slide. I became the picture of the beaten husband, shoulders heavy, eyes tired, saying little. Amanda fed on it, convinced she'd already broken me. Tyler strutted beside her like a rooster, blind to the fact he was standing on quicksand. Rebecca reminded me, "The quieter you are, the louder the truth will sound when it hits." So I waited. I let Amanda believe she had me cornered, because sometimes the deadliest move isn't a strike, it's the silence before checkmate. And Amanda was about to discover that silence. While I kept my silence, Amanda and Tyler were busy planning their new empire. Over dinner at Peter Luger's, they toasted with $1,000 bottles of wine, whispering about ocean breezes and white sand. "Miami Beach," Amanda said, sliding her phone across the table to show Tyler the listing. A glass-walled penthouse 40 floors up, infinity pool spilling into the horizon. "Once the judge signs, this will be ours." Tyler leaned back, grinning like he'd already moved in. "Penthouse living, baby. He won't know what hit him." They even put down a deposit, convinced the money would flow like champagne. Amanda imagined mornings on the balcony, silk robes and mimosas, Tyler at her side. What they didn't see was the real picture. Every toast, every signature, every fantasy was financed with wealth they'd never touch. And while they were measuring penthouse curtains, Rebecca and I were sharpening the blade that would cut their dream in half. Amanda didn't hire a lawyer. She hired a bulldozer with a law degree. Martin Klein strutted into every room like he owned the courthouse. Expensive pinstripe suits, gold cufflinks flashing, voice loud enough to rattle windows. He'd built his reputation on theatrics, slamming files on desks, tearing into wealthy husbands until they caved. Amanda adored him. Tyler bragged, "This guy's never lost." When Klein called me for the first time, he didn't even say hello. "Carter, you're done. Save us both the time and settle now. You've got no protections in place. Illinois law's clear. You're finished." His arrogance bled through every word, as if the verdict had already been signed. I let him talk, offering nothing in return. To him, my silence was weakness. To me, it was ammunition. Because Martin Klein had no idea he was walking into Rebecca's war room, and the louder he shouted, the harder his fall was going to be. In the weeks before court, I lived like a soldier on the eve of battle. My days ran like clockwork, construction sites in the morning, documents with Rebecca at night, workouts at dawn to keep my head sharp. No drinking, no distractions, just discipline. I wanted to walk into that courtroom steady, the way a fighter steps into the ring knowing he's trained for every punch. Amanda thought my silence meant surrender. Tyler thought my calm meant defeat. But inside, I was steel. Every document Rebecca filed, every signature dated years before our marriage, felt like another weapon strapped to my side. I stood in front of the mirror one night, adjusting the same navy blazer I'd wear to court, whispering to myself, "Stay quiet. Let them talk. Then let the truth do the killing." Because when the judge finally called my name, I wouldn't need fireworks. I would only need facts, and facts never lose. The morning of the first hearing, the marble steps of the Manhattan courthouse echoed like a stage. Amanda arrived as if it were a red carpet premiere. Designer heels clicking, fresh manicure flashing, diamond earrings catching the winter sun. Tyler walked beside her, hand draped across her waist, the picture of stolen confidence. Reporters' eyes lingered. Even strangers turned their heads. She smiled at every glance as though she were about to receive an award instead of dismantle a marriage. I watched from a distance, navy blazer, plain tie, no entourage, no theatrics. To anyone else, I looked like the man about to be crushed. To me, she looked like a gambler walking into a casino, convinced the house always loses. Inside, she whispered to Tyler, "After today, we'll never worry about money again." What she didn't know was that money had already chosen its side, and the judge was seconds away from pulling back the curtain. Tyler walked beside Amanda like he was already a millionaire. His suit was sharp but borrowed, the Rolex on his wrist a gift he hadn't earned. He puffed his chest out as if every marble column of the courthouse had been built in his honor. To him, this wasn't a divorce hearing. It was a coronation. The jackpot was minutes away, and all he had to do was sit quietly while Amanda's lawyer bulldozed me. He whispered in her ear, smirk wide, "By tonight, babe, we'll be celebrating in Miami." I studied him from across the hallway. That cocky stride, that careless grin. It was the look of a man who'd never built anything in his life but believed he deserved everything. Men like Tyler don't plan for storms. They don't even notice the clouds. And as we filed into the courtroom, he had no idea the thunder he feared would come dressed as paperwork. The judge called the case, and Martin Klein leapt to his feet like an actor hitting his mark. He buttoned his pinstripe jacket, squared his shoulders, and launched into a performance he'd probably rehearsed in the mirror that morning. "Your Honor," he boomed, voice echoing through the chamber, "my client, Amanda Carter, devoted 5 years of her life to building her husband's empire. She stood by him, supported him, and under the law of this state, she is entitled to half, $4 million. Homes, businesses, vehicles, investments. She has earned every cent." Amanda dabbed her eyes on cue. Tyler squeezed her hand under the table. To them, it was a standing ovation. To Martin, it was another open and shut case. But I watched Judge Doyle's eyes. 23 years on the bench, she didn't flinch at theatrics. She wasn't swayed by loud voices. She waited for evidence. And when Rebecca stood to respond, the temperature in that room shifted like a storm rolling in. As Martin thundered on about fairness and justice, I stayed perfectly still. My hands folded on the table, my blazer plain, no flashy watch, no theatrics. I kept my eyes low, nodding occasionally like a man who'd already accepted defeat. To Amanda, I must have looked broken. She glanced at me with that razor smile, convinced my silence was surrender. Tyler leaned back in his chair, whispering something smug that made her chuckle under her breath. But inside, I wasn't weak. I was watching. Every exaggerated gesture from Martin, every rehearsed sigh from Amanda, every bead of sweat beginning to form on Tyler's temple. It all told me the same story. They thought the game was won. The truth? The game hadn't even started. Because while they celebrated their opening act, Rebecca hadn't said a word yet. And when she did, their performance would collapse under the weight of cold, hard documents. When Martin finally sat down, the air in the courtroom felt thick with his arrogance. Amanda leaned into Tyler's shoulder, certain the judge was already on her side. Then Rebecca stood. No rush, no theatrics. She adjusted her glasses, carried a single binder to the podium, and spoke with the calm authority of someone holding checkmate in her hands. "Your Honor," she said, sliding the first document forward, "the Carter Family Trust, established March 12, 2014, 2 years before this marriage. The residence in question, purchased entirely with trust funds. Title held by the trust, not Mr. Carter personally." The judge's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as she examined the notarized seals. The silence in the courtroom was louder than Martin's booming voice had been moments earlier. Amanda's confident smile flickered. Tyler leaned forward, suddenly less relaxed, and Rebecca wasn't even close to finished. The next document in her binder was about to cut far deeper, straight into the heart of Amanda's fantasy. Judge Catherine Doyle didn't rush. She'd presided over thousands of divorces, seen every trick, every performance. But as she lifted Rebecca's document, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Her glasses slid lower on her nose as she traced the notarized seal, the dates, the signatures. Her brow furrowed, not in doubt, but in focus. This was no sloppy attempt to hide assets. This was precision. Filed 2 years before the marriage, she said quietly, her voice carrying more weight than Martin's entire speech. She glanced over her glasses at him, the kind of look that strips arrogance down to silence. Amanda shifted uncomfortably. Tyler whispered something, but his voice cracked. Martin scribbled furiously, pretending to find an objection he knew didn't exist. I didn't move. I just watched the judge's eyes sharpen, like a hawk locking onto prey. Because once Judge Doyle smelled truth, nothing else mattered, and Rebecca was about to feed her the next strike. Rebecca's voice was steady, each word landing like a hammer. This is the Carter Family Trust, established March 12, 2014, 2 full years before Mr. Carter married the petitioner. She slid the thick packet toward the bench. Official seals glinted under the fluorescent lights. Judge Doyle examined them, nodding slowly, lips pressed into a hard line. This trust legally owns the Carter residence at 112 East 74th Street, Rebecca continued. Purchased with trust funds, not marital income. Title has never been in Mr. Carter's personal name. Amanda's smile collapsed. She darted a look at Martin, who was flipping through his notes like a drowning man searching for a rope. Tyler shifted in his chair, his hands slick with sweat against Amanda's. For the first time since this began, Amanda looked uncertain, and Rebecca hadn't even touched the business yet. The next document waiting in her binder was the one that would rip the floor out from under their case. Rebecca turned the next page in her binder, her movements slow, deliberate. Your Honor, this is the operating agreement for Carter Brothers LLC, established January 8, 2014, again before this marriage. Ownership, Samuel Carter, 51%, David Carter, 49%. All business assets, properties, and equipment belong to the LLC entity. She placed the notarized document on the judge's desk. The room went still. Judge Doyle's eyes scanned the signatures, the corporate seals, the dates. She looked up at Martin. Mr. Klein? He opened his mouth, closed it again. Objection. This seems like a retroactive attempt. Sit down, Mr. Klein, Judge Doyle snapped. These filings predate the marriage by years. Amanda's knuckles whitened around her tissue. Tyler leaned in close, whispering, but she jerked her hand away. Their dream of carving up my company was crumbling, piece by piece. And Rebecca wasn't finished. The cars were next. And when she revealed who owned them, Amanda's world would shrink even further. As Rebecca laid down document after document, Amanda's courtroom mask began to fracture. The confident smile that had carried her up the courthouse steps was gone. Her jaw tightened, her breathing shallow. She dabbed her eyes again, but this time it wasn't part of the act. The tissue shook in her hand. Tyler reached for her under the table, but she pulled away, her nails digging crescents into her palm. Judge Doyle noticed. Everyone did. The image of the wronged wife was slipping, replaced by the face of someone realizing the jackpot wasn't real. Martin leaned in, whispering frantically, but Amanda wasn't listening. Her gaze darted between Rebecca's binder and the judge's pen scratching across the page. I didn't need to say a word. Her panic was the loudest voice in that room, and Rebecca wasn't slowing down, because the next set of documents, the fleet registrations, would erase another piece of her fantasy. If Amanda's mask was cracking, Tyler's armor was melting. He shifted in his chair, tugged at his collar, eyes darting to the exits like a man already plotting his escape. His swagger was gone, replaced by the quiet panic of someone who'd just realized the ground beneath him was quicksand. I could see the sheen of sweat gathering at his temple, his hand sliding nervously against Amanda's. She tried to hold on, but his palm was clammy, trembling. This wasn't the Tyler who bragged about Miami penthouses and champagne balconies. This was a hustler watching his payday evaporate in real time. Every time Rebecca placed another stamped document before the judge, Tyler flinched. Each page was a nail in the coffin of his fantasy life. I sat perfectly still, but inside I almost smiled. Because men like Tyler never survive in courtrooms. And the next revelation, about the fleet of luxury cars, would make him sweat harder. Rebecca's tone never changed, steady, surgical. She opened the next folder. Your Honor, the 10 luxury vehicles listed in the petition are registered under Carter Brothers LLC, purchased between 2017 and 2022 with business funds, titled exclusively to the company fleet program, not marital property. She handed over a stack of registrations, each one stamped and dated. Judge Doyle flipped through them, nodding as she confirmed the purchase records. Amanda's lips parted, but no sound came out. Tyler's leg bounced under the table, the sweat now visible across his brow. Martin muttered something about commingled use, but even he sounded unconvinced. To the court, those cars weren't symbols of a glamorous lifestyle. They were business assets, locked behind corporate walls. Amanda might have posed in them, driven them, flaunted them, but legally, she never owned a single wheel. And as Rebecca closed the folder, she reached for the next stack, documents that would hit even harder, the investments. Rebecca didn't pause. She slid another folder across the podium. Your Honor, the investment accounts listed in the petition, totaling approximately $3.2 million, are not subject to division. They are housed within the Carter Family Trust, established years before the marriage. Mr. Carter receives a monthly distribution for living expenses, but he has no claim to the principal. Judge Doyle reviewed the notarized documents, flipping page after page. The seals, the dates, the signatures, all airtight. She looked up, expression unreadable, but the silence in the courtroom said everything. Amanda's face drained of color. Tyler gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, as if holding on could keep the money from slipping away. Martin muttered objections that dissolved before leaving his lips. Every portfolio, every account Amanda dreamed of splitting was locked behind legal steel. She wasn't inheriting millions. She was inheriting nothing. And Rebecca wasn't done. The next words out of her mouth would turn Martin's arrogance into desperation. Martin finally snapped. He shoved back his chair, shooting to his feet, voice booming. Your Honor, this is outrageous. These filings are nothing more than a desperate attempt to shield assets from lawful division. Community property laws are clear. Judge Doyle didn't flinch. She raised a hand, cutting through his tirade like a blade through glass. Sit down, Mr. Klein. Her voice was low but carried the weight of decades on the bench. The courtroom froze. Even Amanda blinked, stunned. Tyler glanced at Martin as if waiting for him to salvage their sinking ship, but the judge continued, her tone sharper now. The documents presented are dated and notarized years before this marriage. That is not shielding, Mr. Klein. That is foresight. Martin's face flushed crimson. His papers trembled in his hand as he slowly sank back into his chair. And in that silence, Amanda finally turned to me. For the first time, she realized I wasn't the one cornered. Up until that moment, Amanda hadn't looked at me once. She floated into the courtroom on Tyler's arm, eyes fixed forward, convinced the empire was already hers. But when Judge Doyle silenced Martin, her head finally turned. Our eyes met. For a second, the arrogance was gone. What stared back at me wasn't the confident woman from the courthouse steps. It was someone cornered, someone realizing the jackpot she promised Tyler was nothing but smoke. Her lips trembled, but no words came. She wanted to speak, maybe to curse me, maybe to beg, but the truth was written all over her face. She'd been outplayed. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I just held her gaze, calm and steady, the way a man does when he's already buried his fear years ago. Amanda blinked, tearing her eyes away, but it was too late, because the fortress had spoken louder than any threat, and Rebecca wasn't finished dismantling her fantasy. When Rebecca closed her binder, the courtroom went dead quiet. Not the ordinary hush of proceedings. This was heavier, like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. No one coughed. No one shifted. The only sound was the scratch of Judge Doyle's pen, signing her initials on each page as if sealing Amanda's fate line by line. Amanda stared at the table, tissue crushed in her fist. Tyler sat stiff, jaw tight, sweat dripping down his temple. Even Martin, loud, arrogant Martin, looked like a man suddenly unsure of his own voice. I didn't move. I let the silence speak for me. That silence was my victory speech. Because in divorce court, noise is weakness, evidence is power, and we had brought 7 years of preparation to bury 5 years of betrayal. But Rebecca wasn't finished. She leaned forward, voice calm as steel, ready to drop the final hammer. And what came next would erase Amanda's last illusion. Judge Doyle adjusted her glasses, voice firm, deliberate. Each word carried the weight of finality. The Carter residence, located at 112 East 74th Street, trust property, not subject to division. Amanda's breath caught. Tyler's hand slipped from hers. The Carter brothers' construction business, an LLC established prior to this marriage, not community property. Martin lowered his head, scribbling nonsense onto his pad just to avoid eye contact. The fleet of vehicles, corporate-owned, acquired with business funds, not community property. Every sentence was a blow, a gavel strike echoing in Amanda's chest. The investment portfolios, held within an irrevocable trust, not community property. By the time she paused, Amanda was trembling, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Tyler sat rigid, lips pressed thin, already calculating his exit. The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was devastation. And the judge wasn't done, because the next words would define exactly what Amanda was walking away with. Judge Doyle turned to the final page, her tone steady as stone. The only community property subject to division is the joint checking account. Balance, $150,000. That sum will be split equally between the parties. The words fell like a blade. Amanda's head snapped up, eyes wide, as if she hadn't heard correctly. Tyler blinked hard, his mouth opening, closing, then hanging slack in disbelief. $150,000. From the fortune she bragged about, from the empire she thought she'd claimed, she was walking away with pocket change. The courtroom stayed silent, the sound of reality louder than any gavel. Amanda's tissue dropped to the floor. She sat frozen, lips trembling, as the life she'd promised Tyler evaporated before her eyes. And while she drowned in shock, I sat calm, steady, exactly as I'd planned, because the fortress had held. But the true destruction was only beginning. The words seemed to hang in the air, echoing louder than the judge's gavel ever could. $150,000. That was it. The gallery stirred. A woman in the back gasped softly. A man whispered, "That's all?" Reporters exchanged glances, pens scratching furiously across their notepads. Even the bailiff's jaw tightened, eyes flicking from Amanda's trembling frame to Tyler's pale face. Amanda looked as though the floor had dropped out beneath her. Her hands gripped the table so hard her knuckles blanched white. Tyler shifted in his chair, shoulders hunched, the predator's swagger replaced by a trapped animal's panic. Martin stared at his notes as if answers might appear in the margins, but there was nothing left to argue. His grand performance had dissolved into silence. I sat motionless, letting the weight of the moment settle on everyone else. Because this wasn't just my victory, it was their collapse. And the collapse was about to get louder. The silence shattered when Tyler shot to his feet, his chair screeching across the marble floor. "This is impossible," he blurted, voice cracking. Heads whipped toward him. The bailiff stiffened, ready to move if needed. Amanda tugged at his sleeve, hissing, "Sit down!" But Tyler was unraveling. His face was red, sweat dripping down his jaw, eyes wild like a gambler watching his last chip swept off the table. "We had a deal!" he shouted, though it wasn't clear if he was yelling at Amanda, the judge, or fate itself. His voice echoed through the chamber, raw and desperate, the swagger long gone. Judge Doyle's gavel cracked once. "Mr. Brooks, sit down, or you will be removed from this courtroom." Tyler froze, chest heaving, then dropped back into his chair, humiliated. The gallery buzzed with whispers, and in that chaos, Amanda turned to me for the first time with something I'd never seen in her eyes before: fear. As Tyler's outburst echoed and Amanda's composure crumbled, I felt something unexpected: calm. My pulse didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I sat there breathing steady, as though I'd been waiting for this moment my entire life. Because I had. Every sleepless night in that pickup truck, every meeting with Rebecca, every document signed years before Amanda walked into my world, it had all led here. And now the fortress stood, unshaken, while the storm raged against it. I watched Amanda's painted confidence melt away. I watched Tyler's bravado collapse into panic. And I realized the truth. I didn't need to win this battle with noise or fury. I had already won it with patience and preparation. Calm is what you feel when the trap finally closes. And as I sat in that courtroom, Watching the walls fall in on them, I knew the judge's final words would seal everything forever. Judge Doyle raised her gavel, her voice cutting through the courtroom like steel. After review of all evidence presented, this court finds that the contested assets are not marital property. The only divisible sum is $150,000 in the joint account to be split equally. She paused, her eyes moving from Amanda to Martin to Tyler. Accordingly, Mrs. Carter's petition for further distribution is denied. Case closed. The gavel cracked against the bench. One sharp strike and it was finished. Amanda's breath hitched like she'd been struck. Tyler slumped in his chair, face drained of all color. Martin stared straight ahead, frozen, his reputation bleeding out in silence. Around us the gallery stirred, whispers, gasps, pens scratching. But for me, time slowed. Years of discipline, months of silence, hours of testimony, all reduced to a single, final sentence. The fortress had held. And now, as the dust settled, Amanda's real collapse was only beginning. Amanda didn't scream. She didn't argue. She just froze, as if her body had turned to stone in that chair. The courtroom lights glared off her diamond earrings, but they no longer sparkled. They looked heavy, dragging her down. Her designer handbag slipped from her lap and thudded against the floor, louder than her voice. The Louboutins she had strutted in on now seemed impossible to stand in. Even her perfume, once intoxicating, hung sour in the air. For years she wore wealth like armor. Now it clung to her like chains, every accessory a reminder of the fortune she had just lost. Amanda's mascara streaked, her manicured nails trembling against the table as if they could claw back the judgment that had already been sealed. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I only watched as the woman who thought she'd gained the world realized she was leaving with nothing. And beside her, Tyler was already calculating his escape. Tyler didn't wait for the gavel's echo to fade. He shoved his chair back, the screech cutting through the courtroom's heavy silence. Amanda reached for his hand, desperate, but he pulled away like she was contagious. "I can't do broke," he muttered, voice low but sharp enough for me to hear. Then louder, almost spitting the words, "Good luck, Amanda." He walked out, head down, avoiding the eyes of the gallery, his swagger gone, replaced by the twitch of a man already thinking about creditors and lies he'd have to explain. Amanda sat frozen, her hands still extended, fingers trembling in the empty air where his grip had been. For 18 months, she bankrolled his lifestyle, his Rolex, his BMW, his champagne nights, and in less than 18 seconds, he erased her. That was Tyler Brooks, a parasite who abandoned the host the moment the blood ran dry. And now, for the first time, Amanda was truly alone. Martin Klein, the bulldozer who strutted into court with gold cufflinks and thunder in his voice, was now reduced to silence. His hands shook as he stuffed papers back into his leather briefcase, each sheet a reminder of his failure. He didn't look at Amanda. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. His face, once flushed with arrogance, was now pale, his jaw tight, eyes darting anywhere but the judge's bench. For decades he had built his reputation on breaking men like me, but today it wasn't my empire that crumbled. It was his. Amanda whispered something to him, desperate, but he snapped the clasps of his case shut without answering. The courtroom had already judged him harsher than Doyle's gavel ever could. For a man who thrived on spectacle, the silence was suffocating. He shuffled toward the exit, reputation in tatters, and I remained seated, calm, as the wreckage of Amanda's army lay scattered around her. When the gavel's echo finally faded, I stood slowly, gathering nothing but a slim manila folder. No theatrics, no victory grin, just the quiet satisfaction of a man who had already won before the battle began. Rebecca rose beside me. We exchanged a firm handshake, professional, steady, almost understated. No high fives, no celebration, just the silent agreement of two people who had executed a plan to perfection. Behind me, I could hear Amanda's muffled sobs, the rustle of Martin's papers, the faint scrape of Tyler's abandoned chair. I didn't turn around. Not once. Because true victory doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need applause. It only needs clarity. I pushed open the heavy courthouse doors, sunlight spilling across the marble steps, the crisp Manhattan air filling my lungs. And in that moment, I knew. Walking forward without looking back was the final judgment Amanda would never escape. Her empire of illusions was gone, and mine had never been touched. When the doors closed behind me, Amanda remained inside, alone at the petitioner's table. The gallery had emptied, Martin had fled, and Tyler was gone without a trace. The room that once echoed with arguments now felt hollow, every sound swallowed by its vast silence. She sat hunched forward, her designer coat draped around her shoulders like dead weight, her makeup streaked into shadows. The diamond bracelet on her wrist glittered under the harsh fluorescent lights, mocking her with the memory of a lifestyle that no longer belonged to her. Her manicured nails tapped the wood nervously, as if searching for a rhythm that could anchor her to reality. But there was none. Only emptiness. That was the picture burned into my mind. Amanda surrounded not by wealth, not by allies, but by the wreckage of her own choices. And as she sat there, paralyzed by silence, her phone buzzed with the final nail in her coffin. The silence of the courtroom broke with a faint vibration. Amanda fumbled for her phone, hope flickering across her face as if Tyler might still be her anchor. She unlocked the screen, read the message, and I watched the last light drain from her eyes. "I'm done. Can't do broke. Good luck." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a handful of words that cut sharper than any gavel. Her hand shook, the phone slipping onto the table with a dull clatter. The same man she risked everything for, her marriage, her reputation, her future, had abandoned her in the span of one sentence. Amanda's shoulders collapsed inward. For the first time in 5 years, she looked small, and as the bailiff waited politely for her to stand, she stared at the glowing screen, the words burning into her like a brand. The courtroom had taken her fortune, Tyler had taken her dignity, and soon, life would take the rest. The last image I carry from that day isn't Amanda's tears or Tyler's rage, it's the sunlight. As I pushed through the courthouse doors, the chill of marble and whispers gave way to the warmth of a New York afternoon. The city roared around me, horns, footsteps, life moving forward, but for me it was silence, a clean slate. I took a breath that felt like my first in years. No chains, no games, no hidden knives waiting at the dinner table, just the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat and the freedom of knowing I had kept the promise I made to myself in that pickup truck years ago. Never again. Behind me, the courthouse loomed like a fortress I had conquered. Ahead, the streets stretched open, unmarked, alive with possibility. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because that day, stepping into the sunlight, I wasn't just leaving court. I was walking free. As I stepped into the sunlight, Amanda lingered inside. When she finally emerged, there was no trace of the woman who had strutted up those steps hours earlier. The diamonds still clung to her ears, the Louboutins still clicked against the stone, but they no longer looked like symbols of power. They looked like props in a tragedy. The valet didn't bring her a sleek Mercedes or the BMW Tyler used to drive. Instead, he rolled up in a dented silver Honda Civic, the kind of car she once mocked as beneath her. She froze, eyes darting around, as if hoping someone would appear with a different set of keys. No one did. She slid into the driver's seat, shoulders hunched, trying to disappear behind tinted glass. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally pulled away. Slow, awkward, nothing glamorous about it. That was her victory lap, leaving the courthouse in a car that wasn't even paid off. And it was only the beginning of her fall. The very next morning, I was back on site at Carter Brothers. Hard hat, steel boots, blueprints under my arm. The noise of jackhammers and the smell of fresh concrete, my real world, drowned out any trace of courtroom drama. My employees didn't ask about the trial. They didn't need to. Business carried on, contracts moved forward, paychecks cleared on time. To them, I wasn't a man who had just survived a divorce. I was their boss, steady as ever. I signed off on a new project that week, reviewed bids, laughed with Samuel over lunch about expansion plans. No bitterness, no gloating, just work, just life. Because the truth is, Amanda hadn't taken anything from me. Not my house, not my company, not my future. She walked away empty-handed. I walked away unchanged. To me, it was as if there had been no divorce at all. But for Amanda, the real sentence was only beginning. 3 months after the gavel fell, Amanda's world looked nothing like the glossy life she flaunted on Instagram. Gone were the penthouse dinners and designer handbags. Now she lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Queens. The chandelier light of the plaza had been replaced by the dull flicker of a single lamp. Her dining table was a folding card table, covered with overdue bills and collection notices. The $150,000 she walked away with vanished, bled dry by legal fees, credit card debt, and the lifestyle she couldn't let go of until reality forced her hand. Neighbors didn't see a glamorous socialite anymore. They saw a woman lugging groceries up 2 flights of stairs, her heels replaced by worn sneakers, her laughter gone. She had traded silk sheets for discount linens, champagne for instant coffee. And the man she gave everything up for? He had already disappeared. The $150,000 Amanda left court with sounded like salvation at the time. In reality, it was quicksand. Within weeks, half vanished into Martin Klein's expenses and unpaid retainers. Irony for a lawyer who lost her everything. Another slice disappeared into credit card balances she had racked up keeping Tyler impressed. Luxury dinners, hotel suites, gifts that now sat useless in drawers. By the end of the first month, nearly $100,000 was gone. Rent deposits, cheap furniture for the new apartment, and medical bills she hadn't planned for ate the rest. What looked like a cushion shrank to crumbs. Amanda had once spoken about yachts and penthouses. Now she was counting pennies, asking herself if she could stretch a single paycheck substitute long enough to cover groceries. Money doesn't just vanish. It exposes who you really are when it's gone. And Amanda was about to learn that poverty doesn't wait. It devours. Tyler Brooks, the man who promised Amanda penthouses and forever, was gone before the ink on the judgment dried. One day he was in her bed, the next he was a ghost. His BMW, registered in her name, vanished with him. So did the Rolex, the designer suits, the last scraps of her dignity. Rumors trickled back to me through mutual contacts. Tyler had bolted to Florida, working construction under a fake name, ducking loan sharks who wanted their money back. The Miami penthouse deposit he bragged about? Borrowed cash from men who don't forgive missed payments. Amanda texted him, called him, begged him to explain. His only reply was silence. He hadn't just left her. He'd erased her. She'd gambled her marriage for a man who couldn't even stand by her when the first storm hit. And now, with Tyler gone and the money burned, Amanda was left with the one thing she had never prepared for: loneliness. Amanda had always lived in the light. Cameras flashing, champagne glasses clinking, friends orbiting her like moths to a flame. But when the money disappeared, so did the audience. The invitations stopped. The brunches at the plaza dried up. The so-called girlfriends who once gushed over her designer bags no longer answered her calls. Without the glitter, she wasn't interesting. She was invisible. Nights stretched long in that cramped apartment. She scrolled through old photos of herself draped in diamonds, her smile radiant, Tyler's arm around her waist. But the woman in those pictures felt like a stranger, someone who had burned out like a dying star. The phone stayed silent. The mirrors grew crueler, and the only company Amanda kept was the echo of choices she couldn't undo. The truth is, wealth had never made her powerful. It had only masked her weakness. And now, stripped of it all, the weakness was all that remained. While Amanda drowned in silence, my life moved forward without a ripple. One Tuesday afternoon, Samuel dropped by my office, blueprints tucked under his arm and coffee in hand. "Fourth sight," he said with a grin, spreading the plans across my desk. Concrete steel deadlines. It was the kind of language we spoke fluently. We debated costs, argued about suppliers, laughed over the idea of adding another crew. There was no mention of court, no whisper of Amanda, no shadow of the past. Just two brothers talking about the future, solid, tangible, built brick by brick. I signed off on the preliminary bid that day. Another project, another layer added to the fortress. But this time, it wasn't about protection. It was about growth. Amanda had chased illusions and lost. I had invested in foundations and won. And as we shook hands, my phone buzzed with Rebecca's name, her voice carrying news I already suspected. Amanda hadn't learned a thing. That evening, Rebecca's name lit up my phone. Her tone was calm, almost amused. "David, you won't be surprised by this. Amanda's already on the hunt again." She'd been spotted at a networking event in Midtown, clinging to the arm of a recently divorced pharmaceutical executive. Same smile, same laugh, same performance she once rehearsed for me. Rebecca sighed. Some people don't change, they just circle until they find the next host. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the office window at the city lights. Part of me almost felt sorry for the man, another target blinded by beauty, walking straight into a trap he couldn't see. Almost. Amanda wasn't rebuilding. She was recycling the same script, chasing wealth instead of wisdom. But here's the thing about running the same con twice. The ending never changes. And sooner or later she would discover that some reputations, once broken, never recover. As Rebecca's words sank in, I understood something I should have seen years ago. Betrayal isn't an accident, it's a pattern. People like Amanda don't stumble into disloyalty. They orbit it, pulled in again and again by their own gravity. They crave shortcuts. They chase thrills. They see relationships not as bonds, but as ladders. And once they've climbed as high as they can, they look down, not to appreciate the view, but to find their next rung. Amanda hadn't changed with Tyler, and she wouldn't change with this new man. Different suit, different smile, same ending. The details shift, but the story repeats. It's the rule of betrayers. They never stop. Not because they can't, but because stopping would mean facing themselves, and that's the one truth they'll never confront. I didn't hate her for it anymore, but I knew the cycle would chew her up long after I was gone. While Amanda chased shadows, my life returned to balance. Mornings started at 5, coffee black, boots laced, site visits before the city was awake. Afternoons were spent reviewing contracts, evenings with a book instead of battles. No arguments, no hidden agendas, just rhythm. I trained my body, sharpened my mind, and gave my time only to people who valued it. Work thrived, relationships strengthened, and the silence in my house no longer felt empty. It felt earned. There were no more games, no more whispers behind locked doors. Only discipline and peace, the kind that comes when you know you've faced the storm and walked out stronger. Amanda's world had been built on noise and glitter. Mine was rebuilt on structure and patience. And as the months passed, I realized something profound. The greatest wealth isn't in what you own. It's in knowing nothing, and no one, can shake the ground beneath your feet again. Amanda once believed she could buy her way out of anything. Loneliness, regret, even morality. But when the money dried up, the silence grew louder. Nights in her tiny apartment stretched endlessly, broken only by the buzz of overdue notices sliding under the door. The friends who once fought for her attention had vanished. The men who once circled her moved on to younger, wealthier prey. Even Tyler's memory lingered only as a bitter aftertaste, a reminder of how cheaply she had sold her soul. She sat at that folding table with a chipped mug of instant coffee, staring at her reflection in the window. No diamonds, no silk, no cameras, just the hollow outline of someone who had gambled everything and ended with nothing. That was the first time Amanda tasted loneliness in its purest form, not the absence of people, the absence of worth. And it was then I understood. Her sentence had only just begun. So here I am, looking back at it all. Amanda thought she could strip me bare, Tyler thought he'd ride her greed into fortune, and Martin thought theatrics could bury the truth. But in the end, none of them were fighting me. They were fighting paper. Dates, signatures, structures that were built long before betrayal ever entered the room. That's the real lesson. Justice doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it's math, quiet, precise, unshakable. Love can lie, promises can fail, people can walk away. But preparation never betrays you. I made my choice years ago when I was broken and sleeping in a truck. And because of that choice, I walked out of court free, untouched, and stronger than before. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think I was too ruthless, or just prepared? Drop your thoughts below. And if you believe in the power of preparation, share this story.